Okay, there we are. I'd like to welcome you to our second part of what is kind of a, I wanted to say lecture series, but kind of an open format discussion about Eurasian ideas. If you have no idea who I am, my name is Tim Kirby, and I've written about a lot of ideology and geopolitics, living in Russia for a long time, and when you live over here, you're exposed to a very different reality. In our first video, we discussed how in the West there's sort of a debate between equality and equity, whereas in Russia there's this concept of fairness that you could have essentially, when you look at things through this sort of Russian filter, people are never going to be equal in some sort of hierarchical sense or maybe even legal sense, but the main thing is that way everyone gets their cut, that everything works out to be fair, much in the same way that the operator of the owner of a restaurant is never going to be equal to his employees. However, there can be a fair agreement between them. Children are never going to be equal to their parents, well, until they become 18, but there can be a fair agreement and mutual responsibilities based on their ability to contribute to the family, so on and so forth. And that's our sort of first very Russian way of looking at politics. Also is a tradition here. I'm going to make sure that the audio is working properly. So far, I don't see any complaints. That means it must be. So, today's topic is kind of extending on the first one. Well, they're all going to tie into each other because they're all about this new way of thinking that you can experience if you kind of take a jump into the Russian intellectual world. And today's topic is about democracy, another interesting word that we're all familiar with. It is sort of the basis of everything around us, and it is very much the default position. And the first thing I wanted to mention to you is a cliche, but it's an important cliche, right? Whenever we talk about democracy, someone's always going to raise their hand, like the best student at school, and they're going to say, but actually, teacher, we live in a constitutional republic, we being Americans or other countries with a constitution. And then someone always going to bring up the fact that England technically doesn't have a constitution, so is it a constitutional republic? Very, very confusing. The nuances begin. But long story short, technically, really none of us live in a democracy. There is no government that runs on some sort of like ancient Athenian let's gather all the people together and vote about what our naval policies are going to be. And even in the ancient Greek times, they weren't inviting everyone to discuss that or vote on it. So one thing I want to make about this point is not to dispel something you already know about. If you're over the age of 20, you've already heard that cliche. That's why I call it a cliche. But the thing we have to think about is, okay, if then democracy is not the system we have, then aren't we living a lie? Because remember, I don't want to be too much, because some people really flip out when you pick information from a source they don't like. And Jordan Peterson is very divisive. The dictionary says it's pronounced divisive, but I've never liked that. So I'm going to say divisive. Very divisive individual, and some people like him, some people don't. I have a few bones to pick with him. His views that things like tribalism can just be sort of gotten over. No. But overall, I think he's makes some good points, and probably the best point he's ever made is that if there's going to be some sort of tyranny or horrible system, it's going to be based on a lie, right? Because if we look at, I don't know, something, again, more cliches, like the world of 1984, the Ingsoc and Big Brother and all that, very much a system based on lies. The Brave New World, same thing, all lies all day long. And that's where tyranny comes from, because if you live in a country that isn't some sort of tyranny, you can say, hey, the government built this road and it's really good, but then they also built this road that's really bad, and I can say that in public and I don't live in a tyranny, right? That's kind of the logic of it. So essentially, don't we kind of cause a problem for ourselves based on this, if we live a lie that we are living in a tyranny, when we say and use constantly the word democracy? And that's not a good thing. That's something where we kind of start to tie all this stuff together and get into a package. But then if we go away from democracy, well, the alternative is always something that sounds scary. It's essentially, well, if it isn't democracy, then it has to be some sort of totalitarian communism. If it isn't democracy, then it has to be a mustache dictator in Germany in the 1930s. But then we could take things to the next level. because there's an interesting sort of trend, right, where, North Korea is, I believe, the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. Well, that's interesting. And that mustache dictator in the 30s, you can't see on YouTube, his regime back there, well, they also considered themselves to be a sort of form of democracy, didn't they? And to be honest, really, everything that isn't some sort of king or sultan or emperor is basically a democracy. How'd that happen? Well, that's because, in all honesty, one major thing about a democracy of being, again, this idea of the people, the power derived from the people, is that the state exists because a group of people exists that rules over them. Whereas before that, the state existed because God said so. So that's an important distinction. So the Saudis rule. There aren't too many monarchs left. So, the Saudis rule, and the eldest brother who's remaining until they run out of brothers and drop down. Russia actually used to use that system where you didn't have go from father to son. You sort of went down the line to brothers. Then when you ran out of brothers, you went down the line. That kind of succession pattern. Very interesting. The Saudis still do it. But anyways, for them, their country exists and their rulers have divine right. The heavens above ultimately put them in position. And so essentially, when we talk about democracy, the really only thing that really sort of unites all the things that can call themselves democratic, which is, interestingly enough, the three big political theories of that went to war in the 20th century. You have your fascism, communism, and liberalism, which is another word for Western-style democracy. They're all considered themselves to be democratic, and I think they mean democratic as in they are not. No divine right, everything based on man, and this, that, and the other. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? We can talk about this later in the video, but it's something to think about when we get into this word democracy, and is this such the right way to go? So first off, when we talk about democracy, it's kind of a lie. Secondly, when we talk about it, it's essentially just we don't believe in divine right. And then we also can get into the fact that when we really start to analyze it, about how power works, you realize that democracy in any way, even when you sort of get into this like feelings-based democracy, we're kind of at a loss and things kind of don't work this way. Anyways, that was a bit of a tangent. Let's go back to our republic that has representatives, our constitutional republic. So if this is the actual truth that we have, and we want to follow Jordan Peterson's advice and not live a lie, we could maybe perhaps really start beating into our heads some sort of constitutional republicanism and really beat that idea in our heads, and that's actually the system that we have. That's what we have, constitutional republicanism, because that's not what the North Koreans say, and that's not what the mustache dictator said, and various other different systems didn't really see themselves as being that. Although then again, the Soviets did, because they saw themselves with Soviet republics. But anyways, we could do that, but the problem is that when we get into the whole process of, like, again, this idea that maybe people should have the power, or that the government somehow, is by, for, and of the people, in reality, it never is. Because if it was, how could U.S. foreign policy exist? So, for example, right, we elect people, they're supposed to represent us. The overwhelming majority of people in pretty much every country, in fact, I would say every country, are always going to choose peace. They didn't get a lot of war, especially in the United States. And then you get into this weird thing, which I kind of argue as I monitor these strange Chinese accounts that are on VK that all speak English, and they're all sort of like 20-year-old girls. Very interesting. And these Chinese ladies, they try to sort of almost like guilt trip people into the necessity to have a revolution, because essentially, hey, we have democracy and all this, so it's our fault that U.S. foreign policy is bad. But all of us know that none of us asked for it. We don't have any control over it. And then that sort of begs the question, when did we ever have this democracy? Or when did we even have a representational government? Because if we, again, break this thing down, what does a representational government look like? We have 200, 300, 400, 500, however many people that are in a room who are supposed to make the laws of the land. The first flawed concept is that many of them consider themselves to be lawmakers, as in they see a profession where they have to make laws. Whereas, why do we have to change anything? Why do we necessarily have to make laws and have to make change? That's kind of the flaw number one. Flaw number two is we have a lot of people generally for any given law. Let's just talk and say it's a law that has to do with medical care, something, Medicaid reform. Okay, well, if we look at Congress, how many people are real medical specialists? Perhaps the committee that worked on the law might actually have a few people who are doctors or worked in the medical industry in some capacity, and maybe then they know what they're doing in that committee, but everyone else who votes on the law doesn't have any idea. So what happens, and you've heard me talk about this on the channel before, but today we're going to kind of go broad and think about this whole representational government is there's really no way to represent us. And furthermore, the people who do the voting and decisions don't actually really understand in general what they're voting for. Because all of these masses of people who are in these massive rooms, who actually very often don't even show up, can't possibly be experts in everything that they sort of preside over or oversee or vote over. It's just not possible. And you could say, well, again, going back to this whole committee concept, well, the people on a committee who put these ideas together, they're the real important people. Well, that just means that if the ideas for the laws really come from a very small committee and then get voted on by a sort of more ignorant mass of politicians, one, you could just let the ignorant American masses vote, and it wouldn't change things. You could also then essentially look at recent history. Wasn't President Biden on the good old Foreign Relations Committee? And boys, that Foreign Relations Committee, they always seem to want more war, don't they? Despite our best wishes and intentions as the ignorant masses that we are. So, another thing, there's actually really no means to force someone to represent someone else. Now, of course, the theory, if we look at things through the American filter, which is easiest for me, hey, we have like 2 senators per state, and then we have some representatives based on, population. Okay, neato. How exactly does, especially like in the 21st century, maybe in the 1700s, when people came from more close-knit communities, they were more tied to the land. Maybe there was some sort of natural factor that sort of really attached people to the region they're from. But in the 21st century, a lot of the people who are your representatives or your the senators, I mean, it's just an address, isn't it? Like, they're not tied to the land. They're not sitting at night fretting that they're not representing the will of the people. And furthermore, there's no mechanism to sort of force them to act in a way that is a reaction to public demand. Everyone who's in Congress and the Senate and all this other stuff, they are House of Representatives, Senate, Congress, when you put it all together, all these people essentially, there's no mechanism to make them represent you. Okay, so we get another layer of flaws with this. Then we get into the actual process of voting. And the voting process, first off, human beings are irrational. We do not make decisions, especially on these sort of large things in some sort of rational way. If we were rational beings, we would just have basically the candidates sort of write down a list of the things that they're going to try to pursue when they're in office. Heavy emphasis on the word try to pursue. And we would just vote based on some sort of list, but we don't. The presidential election is a show, and, well, not just the election, all elections are a show. It's just the presidential ones are nationwide. It's a show, and it is essentially a popularity contest. And essentially, that, again, that's another cliche that the American presidential race, and I would say all elections, are really a popularity contest where people vote based on feelings because they're human beings and not robots. It kind of also throws another monkey wrench in this idea of representative democracy because people don't really actually pick what they actually want. They more respond to some sort of popular figure. So, for example, if we want to put together a basketball team at our school, but we vote for the most popular boy to be the captain of it and the organizer of it, even though he's kind of a dimwit, that's not going to give us the basketball team we want. Primitive example, but you see what I mean. So, again, we're really, all of us grow up in this whole, like, democracy sort of bubble. But what if you didn't? What if you grew up in essentially the Soviet Union, then you lived through the complete and total anarchy of the 1990s, and then you started to live in a democracy that's more sort of based on Western-style democracy, that's sort of more based on the nod, kind of inner working together. Voting isn't so much to make change. It's more so just for the populace to signal that they like the way that things are going. That's where we kind of get into a more Eurasian, Eastern style form of this idea of democracy. In our first episode, I think I had a lot more of a concrete suggestion about the alternative to the equality versus equity debate. This time, I kind of don't have a real packaged answer for you. We can pick some examples of the way things work out here, which I guess we can cover pretty soon. But just the main thing is that, like, if we're going to have a sort of new Russia with new ideas and all this whole idea of trying to package everything into what we would call democracy and representative government is essentially a lie, and we really can't build a new system or a better way of doing things based on a lie. Because especially, you know, when you really think about it, it kind of doesn't matter. Like the whole voting, this whole party systems. Because remember, even again, another thing that I forgot to mention is that even when you vote, in every country on earth, there's some sort of electoral commission. Be they in America, there's a lot of them, or be they in some countries, there's one central one. And so even if you live in a country that maybe is sort of free and fair, there's always going to be a certain limit to who can be elected, how many parties you can have, who gets on the ballot, who doesn't do this, who doesn't meet what such and such requirement. Then we also get into the whole lobbying factor, where again, we have to think, what's a more powerful force? This invisible sort of idea that representatives have to engage in the interests of people who live in a particular district of a country versus lobbyist money that makes them rich. Amazing. So essentially, when you start living in Russia, one of the big things I kind of mentioned about the sort of recent history of it is that because people are sort of more skeptical about democracy in that they don't really believe in it, and they kind of see it as essentially, let me put it this way. In Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, I'm not sure about China, North Korea for sure, that I do know. You tend to have this situation where there tends to be sort of one large party that's kind of like the general masses party, and then you have a few smaller sort of orbiter central interest parties that don't super disagree with the core party overall. They just would like to sort of change the flavor of things. And again, when people vote, they don't really vote in a sort of battle between parties, but they mostly vote just to show that they approve of the way things are going. It's more just sort of like, I showed up and I voted, that means I think the government is legitimate, if that makes any sense. And again, I guess that might be fine, but it is kind of living a lie, isn't it? Because it's this charade that we're making this choice between parties or something, when it's really more of a confirmation. And in some ways, I think that the history of voting in the Soviet Union was kind of more honest, because people would just sort of show up and they'd either vote for the presented candidate from the Communist Party, or they'd vote no. They'd vote against. Although if you look at the records of it, obviously the everyone kind of just went along with the Communist Party, and the Communist Party betrayed the entire country. So did that system yield great results? No, but it certainly had the Eurasian flavor that you're sort of going to get used to when you live here. Furthermore, one thing that I think is very different about the way that especially Russians see things is that, like, when people in America vote, they tend to be the sort of left, right, and center, and people seem to vote for certain values, this, that, and the other. But all Russians care about is getting the stuff. Russians do not really systemically care what their system looks like. Like, there's no Adam Smith, he's the man. No, we have to go and do only Keynesian economics. Like, that sort of thing doesn't happen here. No one cares. It's essentially the masses are just like, pay me. Whoever's going to pay out, pay me. Whatever the system has to look like, fine. Who cares? Doesn't matter, right? You do not really get into any particular, let's just say, constitutional debates on Russian television, and people don't really look at things like that. And I've mentioned in the past that Russians can be sort of pessimistic about things, and so that sort of natural pessimism it gives the democracy here its own sort of flavor, whereas Americans tend to be very optimistic, so it's high-minded, and we very often, I think, put values into our politicians that aren't really there, or at least the ones they try to advertise. In Russia, people are a lot more skeptical. To be honest, one of the key factors in voting is actually just keeping things the way they are. And that doesn't mean voting for the incumbent. I literally mean that a lot of people, one of their main reasons for voting for any particular candidate, or especially the United Russia Party, is just keep things the same. Don't make change. Change is risky. Remember, Russians do not like their risk for the most part. So, going back to things, if we're going to come up with some new, different Eurasian ideas, then this whole idea that's essentially a lie, that we the masses, okay, we're really the boss, okay, that idea that we the masses are somehow the boss because we can vote between a select group of candidates selected essentially by some sort of either separate entity or government entity, but even if it's a sort of separate independent entity, they're bribable like everyone else, and they have their own biases, this, that, and the other. So we think that we have power because we can pick someone from a very limited set of options that are all approved by the state, who then somehow has to represent us because he owns a house with an address in the region where some of us voted in, or something like that. And that means he's going to fight day and night for the interests of the people in that region. And furthermore, he's going to fight day and night for their interests when he may know absolutely nothing about the key interests at play. Again, someone who knows nothing about medicine has to vote on healthcare policies. It happens every day. And furthermore, all of these people are much more financially motivated to engage with lobbyists than they are with you and me. So this whole idea of the people having the power, it's kind of bullshit. Kind of, it is. It's not that way in America. It never was. There's never been a time, even if you go back to sort of the founding fathers, look up Whiskey Rebellion, perfect example. It's like, the United States fights this big war of independence for all these individual rights, this, that, and the other. Ooh, Whiskey Rebellion, got to put them down. Put them down, musket time. So, we're really living a lie here, and perhaps in Russia, living a lie is a little bit easier, especially when no one cares. But this is something we have to think about, because a democracy, as we're advertised to us, that's not the way it goes. Furthermore, again, like I mentioned, you get into this whole thing of democracy is essentially just any sort of state that exists because it wasn't created by God. It's because of a group of people, which also begs the question, could the state exist for some other reason? Interesting. That one I don't have an answer for, but that is also very interesting. And there's been a couple people, especially someone who sort of tried to start their own political party but didn't quite work out. Russian author Nikolai Starikov said that, well, I should say more the Russian way, Starikov. He said that the real problem in government is that we have these sort of open budgets and that the government should be project-based. As in, you know, we need to build some sort of railroad. So then the government needs to just sort of rally to take the money to complete that railroad and then sort of disperse. This kind of reminds me about how the United States used to be, where where they were like, you know, a corporation can only exist for 28 years and then it must vanish. You know, you sort of don't, and even within his own party, they sort of worked on that philosophy of not like having like a regular budget, but like we need to do this, so we need to get money to allocate to that. We need to do this, let's get money to allocate to it. And this sort of project based sort of governance, he thought that was one idea that would be less open to corruption and more sort of in line with the way that Russia functions, which is kind of interesting. My 2 cents on this, and don't hold me to this because I might change my mind, is that in America we talk about small government, but small government is weak government. I think what Russia actually really would benefit from is small but powerful government. Because ultimately, what really happens in Russia, like the way that people, first, another thing we didn't even talk about, because remember, the average person in a democracy does not perceive democracy. Democracy, or Western-style democracy, or representative, constitutional republic, blah, 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 representative government, is something that human beings cannot understand. Human beings can understand the guy on the coin in ancient Rome. The guy on the coin, his face, that's the emperor. And maybe he's semi-divine, and he's in charge for whatever reason until someone kills him, right? That's something people understand, and that is why the presidential election and why is so important, and why even though we were supposed to have this in America, this system that's specifically designed to be to have checks and balances and be divided, into so that way there's no power in one person's hands, we still put a face on the nation. Human beings still have to put a face to their country. They have to have this single sort of iconic representative of being leader guy. And this is something that I think is very much deep in our psychology, that we put not just symbols, sometimes like, there's the statue of the motherland calls. I think if we imagine Russia in our minds, we see this giant woman in robes with a sword, bears as well. But we sort of have to, as human beings, put a face to the entity that we're part of. And that's one of the reasons why we have to have this sort of central figure. Because if you think about it, why does the executive branch have to have one guy? Well, you could say, well, because then you have someone who's ultimately the decider. Well, then why not just have, like, all the branches be like that? Have one super judge and one representative. You know what I mean? I don't know, but there's something about that that's very important. But the main thing that I'm sort of beating around the bush here is that when people vote for, especially the president of the United States, they vote as if he were a dictator. They vote, he comes up and he gives a bunch of promises. Again, he has no mechanisms to guarantee these promises. That was another thing that author Starikov really wanted to do, was create some sort of mechanism to sort of attach promises to politicians, like, I promise to improve healthcare. You don't do it, you can't be a politician anymore. Something like that kind of mechanism. Very interesting idea, but probably very tough, because even if you try your hardest, there's no guarantee the other people in any particular parliament are going to vote for such a wonderful, moral healthcare package that you want to put forward. But anyways, again, when people vote for the president, they essentially vote for someone who's going to be a dictator. The president comes up and says all the things he's going to do. First off, the president shouldn't do anything because he's in the executive branch. The legislative branch is about the allocating money here, creating new laws, possibly unfortunately, they don't do it very often, getting rid of old laws. The president should really actually come up and say what kind of stuff he would veto, or how he would enact the policies made by the Congress. But he doesn't. He comes up and he sells himself as a dictator, even though he's kind of not. And all politicians do that. And again, it adds another layer to the lie that is Western-style democracy. So again, with my thing with Russia is essentially the way that Russians, and again, all human beings, it would seem for the most part, but maybe more so even Russians, perceive things, is they kind of look at the world like we have emperor, which is Putin, and then we have little emperors, which are like the leader of whatever state they live in. Like your governor is also little emperor. And then we have like emperor of transportation. Mishustin, prime minister now, but emperor of taxation. Or maybe we could say shogun of taxation or something like that, or daimyo, or I don't know. We could think of something like that. Probably the better Russian word would be like knyaz, Nologov. But anyways, we sort of see that in the big government, we see the emperors being sort of the face of it, and then there's these sort of other faces of the different sort of ministries and then the different states. And so essentially what I think really Russian people want is they would just want this person to be able to take fairly dramatic action without really having to do everything so bureaucratically. And even if they did that, let's just say we have this sort of weird dictator of taxation, okay? Now, this could create a lot of change too fast, which is something the Founding Fathers were afraid of. But if you think about it, if you have 3 or 4 people come on TV, they talk about taxes the way that they'd want to do tax policy, they sort of sign their name in blood on this particular policy, and you vote for them, and they win, and they essentially have the power to come in and pretty much lay out that plan the way they want to with very little restrictions. Would that not be more democratic? I'm just saying. So, again, when we think about stuff and where these sort of Eurasian ideas, and especially people who want to move here or are interested in Russia, you gotta kind of get this whole idea of this whole democracy and we the people at the bottom control things, because we really don't. And again, about we the people at the bottom, one thing I wanted to mention but I forgot is remember that we sort of talked about how in the first lecture we talked about how essentially society sort of works out to be a pyramid. Doesn't matter if it's communism, doesn't matter if it's 1930s Germany, there's always some sort of pyramid. And essentially, when it comes to this thing about representation and power in a country, let's talk about power. Yeah, the masses as individuals have like zero power. Trust me, if you really want to walk outside and test the government and see who's stronger, the government with its thousands and thousands of police and military and budget, and since it also has thousands of people who, policemen, essentially it never sleeps. And it has plenty of resources to come after you. Trust me, if you want to test the government in a battle of who's more powerful, they are. Absolutely, they are. Now, hold on. If we go back to our sort of analogy that sometimes we use about like a workplace. Yeah, obviously the owner of some restaurant, he has the one who has the power, he pulls the purse strings. But, hey, if none of the employees show up to work, he might be in a lot of trouble. If some of the employees accidentally break accidentally break things at the restaurant or this cafe or whatever, he's in even more trouble. So, in some ways, if we want to also think about, like, again, now let's just talk about people power. If we actually really care about people having power, to some extent, when people are like a massive horde, which is organized by someone, unfortunately, people do not rise up in a horde together automatically. I know you've been told that your whole lives, but they don't. People are risen. They don't rise up. But a large horde of people definitely has a lot of power when it is a large horde. And that's something that we don't really take into account, again, in democracy, because we live in a fantasy world where everyone is exactly the same, with exactly the same opportunities when they're not. But there has to be, to an extent, some sort of uniting factor in society for the people at the bottom to have some kind of strength. I mean, if you even think about it, if you take some sort of crazy examples, like if you really think about it, like the kind of the hillbilly guys in Afghanistan, who fought against the United States for 20 years and somehow pulled it out from just like, sandals and rifles. Well, guess if you got a lot of them and they're well organized, they could take on any power. So again, I'm starting to kind of ramble in a bit of circles here. So let's try to put this together. When it comes to Russia and sort of like the Western style democracy that it was forced to have, the one thing that gives us hope for the future is that no one really believes in it. It's not like a lot of the problems that are happening in the West are very much sort of linked into this sort of set of events that probably started with the Protestant Revolution, which went into the Enlightenment era, which then carried through the American and French revolutions, and so on and so forth, and through the victory of liberalism in the Cold War, and so on and so forth. Whereas because Russians had to have this sort of system subjected onto them, they're a lot more open to change, like I said. Like literally, the Russian masses are just like, whatever system gives me a car and 2 vacations a year, that's the good system. And so it gives us a lot of intellectual sort of flexibility here. Of course, you'll probably find some Russians online who still believe in some Marxist crap. They're unavoidable. So they're still stuck in the idea that, yes, if we sort of unite the working class again, it'll somehow make change. But then again, remember, the working class is at the bottom of the pyramid, and they're going to be united by someone who will use their collective power for their own interest, no matter what they do. But anyways, if we're going to take this idea that the people have to have power, okay, we're going to say that we want to stick with this idea, this feeling that we call democracy, but we really need to use a different word for it. But we need to have this sort of feeling that, which I think is a good thing, that the average person sort of has some control over their destiny, that they have some influence in society or the way society is going, that they're not just some sort of essentially 21st century plantation worker. Well, again, this whole thing of, voting for a chosen few group of people who lie about what they're going to do when they get into power, because even if they think they're telling the truth, they're lying because they can't do any of this stuff for the most part. We're just going to go in and take lobbyist money and then not do anything in a big room, and many of them don't even show up to vote. Okay, so we're definitely going to have to try to sit down and really think about how people could be empowered in a system, or what would that look like? What would a system look like where, if we do, say, vote for something, that we actually get what we voted for? Again, I mentioned this author Nikolai Startikov like twice, because he's really the only person I've really ever heard of actually get into that. Maybe there's some other people out there, but it definitely represents a more Eurasian way of thinking. And so if we're going to have this democracy, then it really has to actually live up to its name, or we go back to this concept of fairness, or we kind of give up on that, but then we have to have some sort of concept of fairness. But then if we don't have this idea that where, the people are the power, then who is the power? Because again, in the West, we have our politicians who flatter us and give us the narcissistic orgasm within ourselves that we're the power when we're not. Well, what if we turned off that lie? What would happen in society? What would happen in Russian society? That I don't know. But anyways, guys, I think that's all for today. There might be a few comments here. I don't know. Let's see. I am just seeing a lot of photographs here in the chat. Hold on. There's all sorts of stuff. Is this really all new messages? There could not be anything that interesting that I would say that'd be... What is going on? Okay. Fifth generation. Alrighty. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so I think this live stream was a complete failure because usually we have like 50 people watching and a lot of comments. No, we have people watching. Okay, I'm just checking. Not that many. Not that many. I think maybe you guys were a little disappointed. Don't worry. That golden goose that we call democracy that we all love and we're used to, guys. It is really just kind of a form of narcissism. It is essentially, you know, like when a 6-year-old dresses up as Batman and they'll be like, I'm Batman, I really am. That's us when we say that we are the power. That's not the way the world works, my friends. Anyways, kind of in a little bit of a pessimistic mood here, but if you're going to get ideas from, say, anywhere in the Eurasian continent, they're really going to be somewhat pessimistic and of this nature. William wants to talk. Hello, William. Okay. I didn't even think I was going to take calls here. But today you have to stay on topic. Sorry. For this series of videos, we have to discuss then today is either the first video or today's topic. The first video being equality, equity, and fairness. Video number 2 being about democracy being essentially a false concept that doesn't really work in Eurasia. William, I have your voice set to blaring loud. Where are you?
Can you hear me, Tim?
I can. Oh my gosh, it's so loud. Okay, hello.
Sorry, it's so noisy. I'm out on the bridge in my city.
It's fine.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the breakdown of simply why this representative government idea is a lie. I'm still kind of turning that through my mind, but I thought you broke it down really simply and nicely. And just told the truth. I mean,
thanks, man. You know, one thing just to tell you is with this series, I want to continue it, even if no one watches it, because it's something that I really actually wanted to do when I started this channel. But the thing is that, again, the hard part is it's really easy to deconstruct something and be like, this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad. Then the hard part comes in, how do we replace it? And like with this topic, I myself am a little bit at a loss as to how we could do things differently. So that's the real challenge here.
So I had a conversation after church today, and I don't know, I don't want to get into that religious debate that took place on one of the feeds, but
well, actually, to be honest, William, hold on. To be honest, this would actually be a really good place to have that debate, rather than people ripping each other apart in the chat and then complaining to me that they're angry because some third party called them a dick.
Fair enough.
Let's do that here. Okay, so let's talk about this.
Well, so this is becoming more of an attractive idea. I mean, I'm Orthodox Christian, so the idea of monarchy and the last monarch. Wait, let me see if I got my history right.
Yeah.
Well, was Nicholas II, the Romanov from the Romanovs, the last Christian monarch. Is that right?
That opens a whole big debate about the last Christian monarch.
Maybe that's not the one that.
If you want to talk about the last monarch in Russia that has actual power, then that sounds pretty good. Unless you get into the weird thing where someone's going to say, like, well, that Baron von Ungern or whatever his name was, who took over Mongolia for like half a year, was a monarch or something. You know, you could get into weird stuff like that. But anyways, let's just say, he was the last one.
Well, this is an idea I'm just kind of interested in, the whole idea of monarchy, which my understanding of it is that basically we are. God is the top dog, and we are all under God's rule. And I think that's a hard sell in this what do you call it? This
Yeah,
world gone
William,
wrong.
here, that's you know what? Here, let's take a quick pause. Don't go anywhere. Don't go too far. I'm just going to mute you. But you brought up a big topic. Is that's what kind of a lot of the monarchists in Russia are saying, because Russia actually does have probably the most vibrant monarchist movement of any country with people who look European in it. That's for sure. So yeah, that's one of the things that they mention is well, there's a few things where people kind of talk about how, well, you know, in a monarchy, you're really passing the power down to your own children, and so that gives some sort of extra motivation to take care of things for the future. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I think the real problem with the monarchy that was, and that's hard, is it's really the succession thing. Because if we had a vote to make Putin the Holy Emperor, he probably would win. Okay, and then we have his emperor. But from what I understand, he has 2 daughters who aren't interested in politics. So that's the problem. And I think that one of the things is where I disagree with Russian monarchists is they really, really like the idea of the monarchy that was, rather than thinking in terms of a 21st century where, you know, if we were to have some sort of monarch-like figure, let's just say, whether they're really powerful or like 25% powerful or something like that to represent the state. At the very least, be like the figurehead that represents the state and does a little bit of things related to power, up to and including having a true emperor. The thing that they won't accept is that you just cannot have a hereditary monarchy. It just doesn't work because it starts to create a few problems. Okay, if you have a hereditary monarchy, then you got to think about, okay, my offspring are very important, and these sort of family relations are important, which sounds good, but that's kind of why there was a lot of inbreeding in monarchies, because the idea is they didn't want to like let outsiders in, and another thing is if anyone can come and have intimate relations with the pharaoh, well then doesn't that just kind of mean that, you know, couldn't anyone be then the queen of Egypt, like anyone? So is the pharaoh that special and magical? Oh, I mentioned Egypt because apparently the Egyptian monarchs were really super mega inbred. They gave the Habsburgs a run for their money when it comes to inbreeding. So you kind of have this sort of like weird cult of inbreeding and having to have an aristocracy. Another thing about Russia is everyone in Russia loves their emperor. However, the aristocracy in Russia has always been, and we don't have a real aristocracy now, but it's kind of informal, let's just say, they're kind of vile. So when Russians sort of also think about that period, we forget about just how vile and disgusting a lot of the aristocracy was. And if you think about it today, the people who sort of would fill that role are even way worse than historical people. So anyways, William, yeah, I just kind of wanted to lay some thoughts out there. Anyways, carry on. You're back on the air.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Wow. Okay. So, as you were saying that, I was just recalling this friend they read one of the most recent and most acclaimed books on the Romanovs, and they were talking about just what you were describing it with the oligarchy. They were super vile, super hateful.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the whole thing too about dude like Dostoevsky having these characters where the main character is actually like a vile person who's someone you should hate. I think it all comes from that. Like you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I guess
the thing what is also like, remember all the Russian celebrities that fled at the beginning of the war because it's such an awful murder? That's exactly who the aristocracy would be, my friend. But anyways, carry on.
Okay. Well, shucks. Well, then I guess, I guess that bubble got burst pretty quick.
Well, no. It's not necessarily because, dude, hold on. I didn't say, because I said the problem was hereditary monarchy. If we were to have, say, Putin declares himself to be again some sort of Lord Emperor, and he then goes at some time, you know, whether secretly or generally in Russia, everyone says Putin knows who's going to replace him, but it's a secret. Only 5 people know, but they know. So anyways, because they can't reveal it. But let's just say that Putin becomes the emperor. He puts on a suit of armor like a true space marine, and he goes, "Guys, I'm too old. This guy replaces me, and I want the public to vote for him. I'm willing to hear different candidates, but this is my guy. Let's put it to a vote for the new emperor for the next 10 years," or something like that. I think something of sort of that nature, of this like selected emperor who maybe even should have zero genetic ties to the previous emperor, would be a much better way of doing it. If there's any Roman historians out there, I do know a lot of the emperors of Rome were not necessarily related by blood to the next emperor. Plenty of them were, but there were even some adoptions in there, and there were some non-related people. So yeah. But anyways, William, got anything?
I wonder, could the patriarch have any be a part of that decision or that promotion? I guess.
No. The patriarch is 100%. The church is separate. Well, has a symbiotic relationship with politics. So that's a tough one. We would have to really actually ask someone in the church if that would violate symbiosis, because the church has to be like essentially give the government sort of like in historical times. Remember, like the Tsar becomes the Tsar because of without the church he's not the Tsar. He's just some guy. So in some ways the church is sort of the kingmaker. But when it comes to voting, I'm not super sure about that. That's a tough one. Maybe that's one where we'd have to talk to someone who really knows their Russian history, especially church-related Russian history, better than I do. But maybe. So.
Well, Tim, thank you. Very, very thought-provoking. I appreciate it.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do, man. Like I said, I'm going to mute you here again, not because you're a bad person, but because the background noises drive me nuts. That's one of the reasons why, unlike Alex Christoforou, who's a great guy, I can't record anything outdoors. It's just not possible. That's one of the reasons why, after having this project going for like a year and a half, I actually wanted to do something here that's a little bit more on the intellectual side. And again, if anyone else would like to call in, do the raise your hand function, we'll talk, and do this whole like Eurasian ideas series, because I think it is something that might be thought-provoking, and I really want to write a book about it, but I just don't know when I'd have the time to do it. Or actually, what would probably be better is if I had an editor, like a video editor, and I could just like write a script and read the text, and have some editor like put together a movie about it. That would be amazing, and actually work this out not as a live stream, but as like a real like structured document kind of way of doing this lecture series. That would be amazing, but I don't know if that's going to happen because I can't pay anyone to do it, and I honestly don't expect anyone to. Essentially, if this is like a 12 lecture series, each one being minimum 40 minutes, that's a lot of frickin' editing, man. That is a lot of editing. That would be done for free. No. I don't think that would go good. Anyways, does anyone else have a question that they would like to raise? Here, well, Antonios Photiades, who is Greek, wrote about democracy and sales of city-state, ancient Greek city-states, Swiss and Dutch city-states, Renaissance, free towns. A city-state which is a warrior, that is a state in practicality, constant war. Demands the honor of being a warrior. Let's just... Oh, well, here, let's see, hold on. Well, he has point 3, the above 2 until the city, the population. So essentially like in ancient Greece, that since all of us would have to, men have to go fight, and so if we all have to fight, then we all get our, we all then should have a say in what the state does, or whether we fight this, that, or the other. Yeah, that's kind of part of it. Of course, someone who's never done military service, and let's hope, Lord willing, I'll never have to. That would be not good for me. I kind of more like the policy of the founding fathers of landowning men. But essentially, if we're going to get into it, one of the things that a lot of... how would I put this? there are certain thinkers in the West who are bold enough to make an assertion that one of the reasons that Western society is collapsing is because beta males and women vote. And essentially that their voices count, because when it comes down to raw numbers, the amount of men who actually are really good decision makers and understand what they're voting for, it's like something like works out to be less than like 20% of the population, and the other 80% is just like emotions and flowers and sunshine. And so there is that. If that's what we're sort of getting at there, indirectly, Antonios, there is that kind of thing. And if we are going to go into the future, then okay, I once did an interview a long time ago, which I wish I still had, which was about some of you're not supposed to say his name on YouTube, or the video gets taken down. The philosopher who shall not be named. A lot of like his ideas, and I talked to one guy, and the philosopher posed the question that, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this lecture series in the first place. Posed the question of, if we come up with a new political theory, well, what would be the basis of it? For liberalism, we have the individual as the base. For your nationalism, it is a particular ethnic group, perhaps religious group. If you are doing communism, then you have, then you have, the working class. So who would be the subject of this new group? And I talked to a Georgian philosopher who speaks fantastic English. So philosopher one to philosopher number two. And number two said that his answer to the one of the great philosopher who cannot be mentioned on YouTube, his answer was that the real, the subject of the theory needs to be the family. That essentially we have the federal Russian government, we have the state government, we have the local government, and then we have the family. And that really, in a lot of ways, the head of the family, or each family unit, would really have one vote. And that in each family we have the father, or at least one man, the elder man, as being sort of the little emperor. And of course the women who are watching this now are probably aghast, because that sounds awful. How could you do this? But they forget that when you are the man in charge, it also means you're the one who's responsible for everyone else. As Spider-Man said, with great power comes great responsibility. Or was that Spider-Man's uncle? Doesn't matter. Those movies suck. But anyways, you see my point. So that Georgian gentleman's concept, I think that there's something to that, in starting to look at the country as the family, as being the smallest unit of, in some ways, being like the state itself, which I thought was very interesting. And it also really motivates, let's just say, people who are a little bit more irresponsible to get responsible, so they at least own their little chunk of Russia, and that little chunk of Russia gives them the ability to vote on a particular issue or a particular day. And if they have, the kids, then they have domain over their kids until they become adults, and this, that, and the other. So very interesting concept of this whole putting the family at the center of things. I kind of wanted to talk about that in a future video, but it came up now, so why not now? Anyways, I'm going back to Antonios's, that is hard to say in English, Antonios's message, that he says about democracy. The word democracy applies nowadays to significantly and utterly individual, nuanced choice or relevant desire, or relevant to sharing. That democracy used to come with like responsibilities to it. Well, that again goes with this whole thing with the Georgian philosopher and this whole family thing. It's like, okay, so only the sort of top dog man of each family votes. Well, if he becomes a drunkard and loses his property, or maybe even his family falls apart, then he sort of loses that status. You see what I mean? So everyone's irresponsible. So, yes. Antonios continues, parliaments were founded as representatives in front of a monarch. If there's no monarch, then the existence of a parliament doesn't make sense. Well, it makes sense to a lot of people now who just blindly accept it. Parliaments becoming a core representing legislative composition is a deviation. Parliaments are founded to be able to present a disagreement, a veto. Well, yeah, that kind of goes back to when I was in high school and I was taking the advanced, what do they even call it? It wasn't history, social sciences or whatever. Who cares? I don't even remember. It doesn't matter. But one time, this particular course was called Advanced Political Studies or Advanced Political Systems. I don't know. But we did a deep analysis of the different political systems. I actually had a really, really good sort of, I guess, political science teacher in high school, despite the fact that my high school was kind of ghetto. And we went over a lot of this, kind of stuff, but we really covered a lot about how, like in France, they had the estates. Like there was the peasantry and the clergy and the aristocracy were like three estates. And of course we got into that and we did some simulations of that. And basically the clergy and the aristocracy, in any sort of like simulation of that system, would always sort of like gang up together and work against the peasantry. First off, in Russian history, it's usually the peasantry and the emperor against what would be the clergy or aristocracy. Maybe not so much the clergy, but the aristocracy definitely. So it's just kind of interesting where in some ways you see that like they divided the system almost in terms of equal weight. Like the aristocracy yielded sort of the same weight as the peasantry or as the clergy. Kind of an interesting concept. Probably obviously didn't work out in the end, but I kind of see what you're saying about parliaments were essentially in some ways to have this interaction with the monarch. Or in some ways, okay, you have your monarch, you have your emperor. Well, how does the emperor know what you want? And that's where you get in this whole thing of like that 4-hour, I guess maybe even now 5-hour yearly TV live show where like the entire country calls in and basically begs Putin for stuff or tries to bring things to his attention. But in a lot of ways, I think this idea of essentially having people, because remember, the presidential administration in Russia has to answer all the messages from Russian citizens, all of them. So in some ways, you have this like 21st century where in the old days, you really had to get the sort of the approval of the emperor to get stuff done. The emperor of China has to sign off on what you want to do. But now we have this like technological bureaucratic mechanism where even the smallest of us can make an address to the emperor. And that's partially the part of that process is how I got my Russian citizenship, is through an address to the emperor. So that's an interesting concept. It's a shame I didn't mention that before this point in the discussion. But this whole thing of being able to write an address to the presidential administration or imperial administration, which would sound much more stylish, and they have to answer you, and it is your right to make appeals to them and demands to them. Kind of interesting. It's kind of tying into what Antonios. Sorry, I said that. Antonios, I hope you don't mind me saying your name in the most American way. Antonios, yo. And the fact that the king is not elected, voted for, even if once in a while he is an idiot, or as an idiotic offspring, spears the poor people. Yeah, I see that. Okay. Antonios, you've made some really good contributions. Oscar Wilde, the predecessor of the 70s post-Trotskyist woke individualist left. Whoa, boy, wow, you're getting way out there, Antonios. Well, one could erase clergy and add to classes, not just a third one. Yeah, with this whole thing of the different estates of the French system, yeah, we could sort of organize that out differently in modern times. But again, if you think about things, like one thing that when I first came to Russia, I thought that this, because I still thought of things in a Western way. When I go on TV talk shows, I'd hear one liberal arguing with like one more. You usually say liberal versus patriot in Russian, but whatever. Liberal versus non-liberal in Russia. And of course, the whole audience is booing. And if was any sort of vote where, back in the days when you could pay 10 cents per SMS message, they were making a lot of money on those. And people would, send their SMS messages, vote against the liberal. And the liberals would always get crushed by like 97%, 95% over and over and over in these debate shows on TV. And I always wondered, why do they keep letting them on TV when no one wants to hear them? Because the liberals that were on there represented big money. They represented what we used to call the oligarchy. They represented the Grant industrial complex and various other forces. And so in a way, even if they were getting 2% of the vote, they had just as much power as the rest of the masses. And then I sort of woke up to that and I was like, oh, actually, why subconsciously the producers of the show put together this debate? It's because they're actually equal. It's just this one has 98 units. You know, it's like having, I want to say ounces, but that's going to be hard to calculate. You know, it's like whether you have 98 individual 1 liter beers or you have a 98 liter keg. It's the same thing. Equal beer, just 2 different formats. However, if you kind of compare them on an individual basis, 98 liters in a keg is much bigger than 1 liter in your hand, you know. So that's was kind of an interesting moment, a revelation in my life. So, yeah. No, you pronounce my name just fine. Oh, thank you. If I was a New Yorker, I'd just be Tony, like Alex would pronounce it. Oh, Tony. Oh. Yeah. I love New York. Inhuman. 9. The sort of classic New Yorker pronunciation there. My favorite is, like instead of saying 789, 789, 9, Inhuman. Those are classics. Anyone else want to talk? I'm always surprised that a certain Serbian never wants to talk. He only listens to me, but when we're on his program, he's always full of piss and vinegar. Actually, 92962 wants to speak. We've talked to you before. Then Antonios wants to talk. Hopefully in a New York accent. Hello.
Hi,
there.
Tim.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good.
I want to throw something at you. It's just something that I'm from Ireland, so I mean, would it be sort of a case that we'll say people that were sort of like loyal to the American Constitution, especially lawyers, would actually bring a RICO case against the government officials for the amount of money they're spending on wars?
Yeah.
And because it is theft at the end of the day, if your people, because the reason I bring it up is the fact that our European Parliament are doing exactly the same shit. They're following the lead of, I would put it down to actually the World Bank and the IMF, because they're losing control of the banking system of the world with the BRICS organization. So as much as, like, we'll say America's the one that's supplying the weapons and so on and so forth, but go down Pennsylvania and you got the World Bank, just down from the White House.
All right, well then here, let me answer your comment there, and also for some of our mods, Serb is saying he would love to call in, but he's banned. Could someone unban him? Serb is the way his name is written, but we all know he has a different name in real life. But anyways, about that previous statement about sort of like with the corruption and stuff. Well, one thing about the United States that's unfortunately I have to be honest and say the word was. Oh, this is so sad. Was the fact that for a long time the Constitution was sacred. And here we get into the idea of, again, government and sacredness. And if essentially everyone, for the most part, the overwhelming majority of people go, boom, that Constitution, maybe I haven't read it since high school, that is the way to go. And when you have, again, you take all the little entities, all the 98 individual bottles of beer, and unite them into that keg, that really gives gave the Constitution power. It's essentially something that everyone read, and everyone at least tried to pretend they understood, and they felt that was a real legit agreement. Okay, that's awesome. That really, really helped. And now that people don't do those things and don't believe it, that is definitely leading to sort of the collapse of society. But again, if we go back to democracy, any constitution, be it the Russian one or the American one or whatever, remember what kind of happens is you have a deal between the people and the government. And generally that deal is written by people who are in the elite. You know, when the American Constitution was written, it wasn't like, uh was it Hamilton, Madison, Jay were the three most responsible? I can't remember. High school was a long time ago. But anyways, some of the more famous, let's just say, people who put their pen to paper in the Constitution, and especially when you got into the whole Bill of Rights things, were they really like going around? Okay, Farmer John, what do you think our political system should be like? Bill, Fred, hey, you, a Native American guy who I guess is going to live here now, uh, walks with slow feet. Could you tell us what you think? They weren't doing that. Essentially, one other issue is that you are sort of brought into this. It's one of the things where people, like atheists, are like, Christianity is so bad because you're born into a deal that obligates you to be forever in debt for Christ's suffering on the cross when you didn't agree to it. You were born into it. That's nuts. That's not fair. But this is basically the same thing with any constitution. And even if the Constitution was somehow more, and again, any Constitution, it's not just America, any of them, was somehow sort of pre-approved by the people by some mechanism, well, guess what? The people who were born 80 years later, they're also born into the system. So that's another thing where we kind of have to think about, okay, how do we do this? And that's, again, where we sort of go back to having things like Orthodox Christianity, which is sort of a more universal, timeless, moral background, right? That is also separate from the government and is vastly beyond it. I think it's another reason why, sort of without some sort of religiosity, a lot of these problems are going to be hard to solve. And I think USERB is now left in disgust, even though I think someone has let him back in the chat. Please, someone let USERB back in the chat. I go on his program all the time. Anyways, Antonios wants to speak. Antonios. Hello? Oh, you're on the air. I think I heard a paperclip fall deep in the background.
I think he put his hand down.
Oh, something. Oh, is that Chris? Oh, I can hear Chris. Chris, did you want to talk, or are you just unmuted for some reason?
Sure. No, I'm an admin, so I can't raise my hand. I just have to barge in.
Oh, you barge in. Okay, well then, sorry, Antonios. Thank you for your really interesting messages, though, Antonios. They were, like, really good. But anyways, Christopher, what's up?
Oh, just wanted to rant a bit.
Rock and roll.
Yeah, the issue. Sure, the issue of democracy versus autocracy.
Yeah.
I'm a former libertarian, and I've never been a big fan of government, period. But like, would 1 million people have the right to tell one person what to do? And on the flip side, would one person have the right to tell 1 million people what to do? And then who gets to decide?
Yeah. And Christopher, in fact, what you just said is going to be the entire theme of one of these sort of lecture series, because what you said right now, in some ways, is actually an unanswerable problem, and that's going to be a big part of this lecture series. But anyways, carry on. Sorry.
Exactly. Personally, I'm willing to tolerate any government that's at least competent and not totally self-serving. Yeah. I'd be more in favor of a non-monarchical parliamentary system with a strict constitution.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like the government have the ability to actually do things, but then there are some things that I just don't want to see government being able to do.
Yeah, no, I understand that, especially after a certain pandemic, we all feel that way. And long story short, I'm going to then put you on mute there, but just as sort of a teaser, one of the things is that we saw with COVID is we definitely saw this debate between can someone, as an average person who doesn't really know anything about science and medicine, make a decision in spite of some sort of authority telling them that, yes, you should do this. Well, when COVID it worked out pretty good. But there's also been plenty of times in history where the opposite was true. And there kind of is no answer. But we'll get into that because in the future video, because in a lot of ways, I think we sort of start to enter in certain unanswerable kind of questions when it comes to politics that don't really have an answer. And I think that that's one, the idea of the ignorant individual versus authority, like to what extent should we listen to authority? I think we don't really have a real clear answer to that. So, anyways, someone jumped in. Something about Joe Biden. Okay, that's enough of that. Anyways, guys, those are all really good calls, really good comments. I'm so happy that this is not a complete failure. When I did the first video, I thought, oh, everyone's going to hate this. All they want to do is get Russian news and stuff. So I'm glad you like that. And I hope that you guys are enjoying the sort of new format we have here about the... on Tim Kirby Russia Hardcore, because, I wasn't really sure if you guys would like how it's become a little bit more serious, but again, everything depends on donations, friends. So again, I'm going to put up a fresh bit here. If you enjoyed the live stream, so say, if you enjoyed the live stream, then try donating. Okay, because donating definitely helps, and it definitely influences kind of what happens here on the channel. And the only people who make like big donations were all like, Tim, I'm gonna stop giving you donations if everything's so chaotic here, too chaotic, not enough you, blah blah blah. Okay. So you guys definitely have influence over here. For a big donation, I'm willing to do a live stream about pretty much anything. You donate, you tell me what you want to talk about on a live stream, we'll rock and roll it. I can do some research. I'm pretty quick on my research when I'm awake. If I've slept well, I can research really well. If I haven't slept well, research is a no-go. So anyways, for the future, if you want to have a custom live stream on a custom topic, make a donation and we'll do it. Anyways, guys, I'm going to hit the road here. I am very sleepy. Oh boy, so sleepy. Yeah.